How often do you see these things? And the answer is probably more often than you would expect these days. Now, bear with me, this will make sense because we're talking metaphorically. See, a unicorn is also a privately owned company worth an estimated $1 billion or more. Technology has allowed for rapid scale-up, while private capital has poured into these companies as investors search for these once rare creatures. The Confederation for British Industry says there are at least 390 unicorns across the world, and they have a huge amount of value. $1.2 trillion. China takes the top spot, and it's closely followed by the US, 100 unicorns each. However, the UK is home to 14. Now, that is by far the most in Europe. France has only 3. Germany has only 2. Now, tech companies dominate the UK list, from pharma to food delivery, from banks to AI. But they are not all tech companies, and they are not all in London, as I found out on a trip to the east coast of Scotland and the city of Aberdeen.
They love a drink in Aberdeen, one in particular.
The brand is very strong, people want a part of it.
This is an oil city, but it is another lubricant that is raking in the cash here and packing out the bars.
Because this is what a billion-pound business looks like.
Did we catch the crest of a wave? Were we in the right place at the right time? Who knows? It's not important.
What is important is that BrewDog is one of Aberdeen's biggest exports, its own unicorn, valued at $2.2 billion, or £1.7 billion.
It's very appropriate that the unicorn is the national animal of Scotland.
With bars and hotels in the UK, the US, Germany, Australia, and more expansion on the way.
We're also looking for a foothold in China.
Even heading into space. All of this in just 12 years. Started by 2 men, a dog, a love of craft beer, and some crowdfunding.
Crowdfunding is basically giving people an opportunity to buy shares and become part of the business. So equity for punks, buy a share, own part of the business. It's not a fad, it's totally in the blood. There's a pride, there's a belief, and there's a real love and ownership of the beers. And I think that's quite special. In terms of wanting that and making that grow more. It's an obsession.
BrewDog is everywhere in Aberdeen, and remember, we are in Scotland, whereas most unicorns tend to be hundreds of miles away in or around London. This is one that is doing just fine on its own up here, and it is having an impact outside of beer.
Aberdeen, a fairly small city. What does having a billion-pound business do for your city?
I think it gives the business community confidence. I think it sets a marker. You can run a major global business from this region. To actually be able to demonstrate the story of 2 guys in a garage with the dog turning into a global brand, other people are now thinking, why not me? I can do that too.
You're worth £1 billion, huge amount of money. Where do you go after £1 billion?
Why not 2 billion or 3 billion? I think that the sky's the limit. We need to know our markets, we need to be in different markets. We're onto a big winner in China, and I think certainly because of the fantastically curious nature of the Chinese nation in trying new things from different parts of the world, I think it could be really interesting. And I think the branding and everything about the branding and the story and where it came from is going to be, I think it's going to be really interesting for us and a real winner.
So there you go, exciting times for them. And BrewDog, clearly a massive brand that has capitalised on a niche market. But to achieve that in value, that kind of value in 12 years, obviously amazing. But imagine doing it in just a matter of months. Well, that is real and it is happening. Take a look. Hey Google, show me where to find a unicorn.
Well, you could try the tech world. That'll be a good place to start.
Invent a business that doesn't exist, and you'll become a unicorn.
They did it with ride sharing and WhatsApp, a pioneer of push messaging.
When Facebook bought WhatsApp, for example, they paid $19 billion, which sounded like madness back then.
Because when it comes to brewing $1 billion, tech is trumping everything.
We ended up growing way faster than we expected.
Financial tech, or fintech especially, like Oak North, one of London's unicorns. A big treat for them. The boss can explain best what it is they do.
Oak North was built really to help small and medium-sized business owners get access to financing from banks, which is something which I would say historically banks have been very poor at providing.
And this is a business that is growing hugely. No time to stand still.
How long did it take you to achieve that status?
It took us just under 2 years.
That's a pretty phenomenal period of
launch.
time from launch.
Yeah.
Was that always in the plan? Presumably you must have hoped for it.
Let me put it this way. I don't think I was audacious enough to have a plan which was that aggressive. We had an aggressive plan, but not that aggressive.
Does it make it more difficult to retain that kind of startup mentality?
Absolutely not.
Earning the big bucks is, of course, the goal for most businesses. The billion-dollar league, though, well, maybe there's a science.
You would imagine most companies want to be a unicorn. There's only a handful of them in the world. So that suggests that a lot of it is luck, maybe?
Well, as in everything in life, of course there's an element of luck in it. But ambition does play a role. When you have people that are driven and that want to make the world a different place, they're more likely to become a unicorn than otherwise.
China has more unicorns than anywhere else. The US comes second.
Because they're the fastest growing economies and the biggest growing economies in the world.
But the UK is fast catching up, largely thanks to the tech scene. Impossible is nothing. Well, they are proving that here every day.
Of course, unicorns are a sign of thriving business, but there is a metaphorical elephant or unicorn in the room here, and that is Brexit. See, the current plan is that the UK is due to leave the EU in a matter of weeks, perhaps with no deal. And there have been warnings about what that could do for the British economy. Earlier, I spoke to Professor Julian Birkinshaw from the London Business School all about this, and I began by asking him if Brexit could be bad news for aspiring unicorns.
So the number of unicorns coming out of this country is almost independent of Brexit, because if you think about the types of companies which are growing to these billion-dollar valuations, most of them are tech companies, most of them are services companies, and when you think about what effect Brexit's going to have on the British economy, most of the effect is actually in the manufacturing and traded goods sector, which generally isn't the one where Brexit's going to have the biggest impact. I think the biggest single nervousness or worry for companies and investors is around, of course, the whole no-deal scenario, because that creates uncertainty, for example, around the continued free flow of capital and the continued free flow of labour.
Let's look at the numbers then. You look at the United States, you look at China, two huge countries. They have got a huge number of unicorns. They're in the triple digits. You've got the UK, smaller economy, smaller country, but it is a country that has given the world a lot of good ideas. Why is the UK only in double figures? Surely they're doing something wrong here.
Yeah. So there is a problem in terms of the number of unicorns, and ultimately most of them are tech companies, so the number of big tech companies that we're creating in the UK. But actually, if you think about it, it's really a European problem, not just a UK problem. I mean, you've got a couple of exceptions like Spotify and so forth. But for the most part, the big tech companies are US companies, West Coast US companies, and increasingly Chinese companies. And so the problem is that Europe is not very good at creating huge tech companies. And the biggest single problem there is that we are not very good at, shall we say, converting successful startups into huge companies. Many, many British companies have been hugely successful at coming up with clever technologies and then selling out. The famous recent example was DeepMind, this artificial intelligence company, which of course Google bought probably about 8 years ago now. Our biggest problem is we don't have enough patient capital. In other words, we don't have enough money and, I would say, a mindset concerned about investing for the long term. We've got lots of people with great ideas. We haven't quite figured out yet a way of staying the distance and turning these billion-dollar companies into 10 or $100 billion companies. For me, that's the biggest challenge for the UK economy, and indeed for many of our European compatriots along the way.
Okay, very briefly, if you can just educate me. So we heard from my guest in my other report when I asked him, if I want to become a unicorn, what is it I need to do? What's the secret? And he said, invent something nobody else has thought of. Is the honest truth that here in the UK, we just run out of good ideas? There's nothing left.
there's lots of good ideas out there, and there's lots of good science as well. And the UK will continue to be a place where a lot of this stuff happens. Actually, I disagree with that premise, which is lots of good ideas. The challenge is turning those good ideas into services that people want to buy. That's actually the difficult thing, right? Because the process of turning those ideas into services people want to buy, that's the competitive thing. That is where the really hard work comes. Because if you think about it, there's thousands of companies out there in every country in the world all trying to create these new services. And you can't really become a unicorn without global reach. You can't do that just on the basis of selling to the UK economy. You've got to do something which the world wants to buy. So actually, for me, they often say that, innovation is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration, hard work. For me, innovation, creating unicorns, is a lot of very hard work, not really just the good ideas.
Fantastic. On that note, we're going to have to leave it there. Professor Julian Beckenshaw from the London Business School, thank you very much for your time. So there you go, the thoughts of a unicorn expert. Yes, they do exist. And here's one ironic final fact for you. This unicorn cost a few pounds, but where do you go when you're looking for a unicorn? Well, we turned to Amazon, another unicorn there, one that is growing every single day, although as we're now establishing, no longer on its own in that billion-dollar league. So guys, I guess it goes to show it is no longer so lonely at the top.